630,000 years ago was the last time that the furious volcanic beast over the land of Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming, raised its head. There are reports that it can take more than 100,000 years for the Yellowstone volcano to erupt again. But the recent increase in volcanic elevation does not seem to agree with this moment. Yellowstone officials noticed this elevation and are closing the park. Following its previous eruptions, the Yellowstone volcano is an unquestionably devastating force when it breaks the surface in all its glory. Even while sleeping, this volcano is one of the largest and most violent magma bodies in the world. It transformed more than 2 million acres of land into a barren land covered with acidic geysers, hot and incredibly deadly. Several unhappy animals and humans lost their lives because of these dangerous water bodies. You can only imagine the devastation that this volcano will cause if it erupts. Will this recent elevation finally cause the eruption of the volcano? Did the officials make the right decision to close the park? Join us as we explore why the Yellowstone officials just closed the park and said that volcanic elevation is rising. Yellowstone National Park is nothing like a typical park covered with green grass and beautiful stone benches of the park. In fact, it is exactly the opposite. Created in 1872, Yellowstone National Park is widely recognized as the first national park in the world. Yellowstone National Park is an area of wild recreation at the top of a volcano sitting right on top of a volcanic access point. It has geological, hydrothermal, and dramatic natural characteristics, some of which are unique to this geographical location. Alpine rivers and exuberant forests, including Old Faithful, which is undoubtedly the most popular geyser in the world. They are all found in Yellowstone and Steamboat Geyser, the largest active geysers in the world. It's an incredible scene to face. The National Park of Yellowstone is home to the largest herd of buffaloes, wolves, brown bears, and other fascinating wild animals in America. It has the highest concentration of geysers and thermal springs than any other place on Earth. It's really a wonderful place, but under the surface, it's a completely different story. Only 3 miles below the surface of the soil at some points, it is one of the largest magma bodies in the world and the largest supervolcano on the continent. It is so hot near the surface that the soil above it seems to be melting. The Yellowstone National Park is located in a northwest corner of Wyoming, but part of it extends to neighboring states of Idaho and Montana, but the volcano itself is located mainly in Wyoming. Many times, like the melted and semi-fused rock that makes up magma under the ground of Yellowstone, feeds upwards in a magma reservoir located very close to the surface, the ground swells. The park houses more than 10,000 hydrothermal features, including thermal springs, geysers, mud, and smoke. Up to 50% of hydrothermal characteristics on the surface of the Earth are concentrated in Yellowstone National Park. The water bodies on the surface are acidic and very close to the boiling point. Geysers are violent and have a bloody history of killing animals and humans, boiling and dissolving their bodies. The activity of this volcano has been closely monitored and has continued since 1923. Even in relatively recent times, the magma activity made the soil swell and rise to 25 centimeters, almost 10 inches. The rise began to decrease, meaning that the magma was cooling and solidifying. This was an early indication for scientists who have monitored the activity of this supervolcano that this dormant giant can be ready to wake up. The detection of a huge sudden rise, a clear sign of a global disaster, about to happen while this dormant giant is occasionally agitated, is something that scientists have not seen anything like. As this finding emerged among scientists and throughout the country, another finding began to emerge as well. No one knew exactly what to expect if this volcano erupted. In the last decade, this volcano began to rise at a faster pace than has been recorded. Speculations that the volcano will only erupt in the next 100,000 years are beginning to settle. And even scientists who were of the opinion that Yellowstone was a dormant volcano began to entertain second thoughts. Everyone began to prepare for the possibility of this volcano erupting suddenly. To try to find out what to expect from a potential eruption of Yellowstone, scientists resorted to the study of the 3 known previous eruptions. All 3, which they had, were of colossal proportions. The evidence of the most recent, which occurred 600,000 years ago, is still evident in the entire large extension of land that comprises Yellowstone National Park. The first eruption occurred approximately 2.1 million years ago and is known as the Huckleberry Ridge eruption. It ejected more than 580 cubic miles of volcanic ash, gases, magma, and other materials. Stoellet has earned its place as the largest eruption known in the history of Yellowstone and in all of North America in the last millions of years. Mesa Falls was the second known eruption of Yellowstone. It occurred 1.3 million years ago and created a cauldron known as the Henry's Caw, located west of Yellowstone. This eruption produced only 67 cubic miles of volcanic material, becoming the smallest of the 3 Yellowstone eruptions. The third largest eruption of Yellowstone is called the Lava Creek eruption, and the most recent known eruption of Yellowstone. The material it ejected was less than half of what was ejected during the Huckleberry Ridge eruption, but it covered an area larger than the Huckleberry Ridge. Huge amounts of volcanic ash and gas were expelled with great force along with magma and other volcanic debris. The events were devastating. Unfortunately, the effects of this monster were not limited to the limits of Yellowstone National Park. What is horrifying is that magma and volcanic debris covered most of the continental United States. In fact, part of the material of this eruption was found even so far away as Louisiana, which is on the opposite end of the continent, thousands of miles away from Wyoming. After these devastating eruptions, the Yellowstone volcano sucked trees, mountains, and everything it could, because it collapsed in itself and formed a depression that still exists today. This depression is known as a cauldron, the Yellowstone Cauldron. A comparable volcanic eruption that occurred in recent times is the infamous volcanic eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980. This eruption killed 56 people and thousands of animals. It also destroyed hundreds of square kilometers of land in Washington and Oregon. Although the eruption of St. Helena can be a good comparison, it is nothing like the last eruption of the supervolcano of Yellowstone, which is estimated to be 1,000 times greater in magnitude than that of St. Helena. The last eruption of Yellowstone must have covered a large fraction of the continent in complete darkness because of all the hot ashes, melted rock, and deadly gases that were launched into the atmosphere thousands of meters away. The magma and gases moved at incredible speed throughout the region, leaving nothing standing in its way. Everything was carbonized and the landscape was covered in darkness and gray. The Yellowstone Cauldron is the place with some of the greatest evidence of the last eruption. This depression is 30 miles wide and 45 miles long, and the thick volcanic waste that remained from the eruption is still visible in an area called Lava Creek. Everyone is waiting for the best, but the geological evidence cannot be ignored. A gigantic volcanic eruption like the one that occurred more than 600,000 years ago is not something for which no one or even any country can prepare appropriately. It will be a destructive event. Therefore, although not denying the possibility of an eruption, scientists are expecting the best. A minimal volcanic event with hydrothermal explosions. Hydrothermal explosions are vapor and hot water eruptions instead of melted rock or lava flows. Lava flows are volcanic events where lava flows slowly out of the cracks and runs on the ground for a few days, months, and maybe even years. They are also a kind of magnetic eruption, but they are not as destructive as a hot water eruption in the middle of an explosion. They are also rare occurrences, but a very preferable option is a complete eruption. The last time a lava flow occurred outside the Yellowstone Canal was about 70,000 years ago. But before that, there were about 30 other lava flows after the complete eruption, which happened more than 600,000 years ago. However, even though 70,000 years have passed since the last lava flow, some traces of this volcanic event, such as layers of rock, can be clearly seen by the walkers along the Yellowstone trails. Some lava extracts can be clearly seen in the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone. Meanwhile, the officials of Yellowstone also detected a huge piece of magma that began to pulsate. And now scientists are not sure if it is realistic to wait for small volcanic events such as hydrothermal explosions or lava flows. The underground activity reached a certain level that increased speculation about when the volcano will erupt and the intensity of the eruption. The frequency of earthquakes in the region of Yellowstone has increased in recent times. On average, from 1,000 to 3,000 earthquakes occur every year in Yellowstone. Some of these earthquakes are very light tremors and some even go unnoticed. But with some of the best equipment to detect and measure earthquakes, scientists are able to measure the activity level of the magma pool below. This magma pool, under the ground of the National Park of Yellowstone, has a reservoir well below the surface, very close to the ground. This reservoir is known as the magma chamber. Whether earthquakes are noticeable or imperceptible to humans, scientists give indications about the speed with which the magma chamber is filling. With earthquakes increasing in intensity and frequency throughout the park, it can be an indication that a new batch of magma is being fed into the magma chamber. It is difficult to accurately predict what these earthquakes mean exactly for Yellowstone National Park. No one knows for sure what Yellowstone will do next. In addition to the inferences that can be derived from the study of the distant and destructive past of the Yellowstone volcano, we can't say much more. These observations of the studies of the previous volcanic eruption of the Yellowstone supervolcano cannot be reliable to accurately predict what the volcano will do next because of how long ago the eruption occurred. The alert from the Yellowstone National System has even announced that the mass elevation in the form of a dome is still increasing in size. This is a clear and unquestionable sign of the increase in volcanic activity on the land of Yellowstone National Park. As the volcanic elevation continues to rise, Yellowstone officials had no other option but to close the park, making it inaccessible to visitors and even some researchers. This situation of mini-lockdown was instituted for people's safety, in the case of a pending volcanic eruption that seems to be closer now than ever in the last 600,000 years. It is very likely that for the human population to be adequately protected, the officials of Yellowstone National Park and the federal government have to do much more than close Yellowstone National Park, especially if a complete volcanic eruption occurs. In the case of volcanic eruptions like the one that occurred 600,000 years ago, entire cities will have to be evacuated in order to protect human lives and also properties. Although an evacuation of this magnitude has never been done before, in the case of a volcanic threat, people in cities and even in neighboring states may have to move to distant states. However, there is still no guarantee that this will really help. A supervolcanic eruption of magnitude, of which Yellowstone is capable, will be so devastating that many few states, if there are any, on the US continent, will be in columns. On the other hand, because of the dangerous state of the bodies of water, the visitors of the Yellowstone National Park are strongly advised to walk always on designated footpaths and trails, and not to touch any of the hydrothermal features. In addition to being extremely hot and acidic, there is something quite bizarre about the water bodies on the Yellowstone surface. Apparently, not all living beings are dead when entering thermal springs, mud pots, or geysers. In fact, some organisms love this heat and acid. An extraordinary collection of microorganisms known as thermophiles found a very propitious home in the hydrothermal characteristics of Yellowstone National Park. Trillions of these organisms thrive in the conditions provided by these water bodies. Although they are too small to be seen with the naked eye, they add up and form a layer of color on the water bodies that inhabit them. This is what gives the water bodies of the park their beautiful colors. As these microorganisms require extreme heat and high alkalinity conditions or acidity to survive, they are also frequently called extremophiles. These extremophiles are yet another danger to humans. They can cause potentially deadly bacterial infections such as meningitis, septicemia, and endocarditis, among others. So when you visit the Yellowstone National Park, we are sure that you will not need anyone to convince you of the need to obey the signs that warn you against contact with hydrothermal characteristics. In some areas, toxic gases probably emanate from hydrothermal characteristics and accumulate in the air. Due to the probability of this happening, visitors are advised to leave the area immediately if they start to feel sick or sick. The Alston forests are prone to forest fires. Every year, forest fires occur in the national park. In 1988, the forest fires were so big that a third of the park was burned. Yellowstone preserved the natural wildlife population, which consists of bison, moose, bears, and also wolves. There are thousands of wild animals that call the National Park of Yellowstone their home. The herd of bison in Yellowstone is the oldest and largest public in the United States. When visiting the park, it is of your greatest interest to never approach the animals. Remember, they are called wild animals for a reason. They are very unpredictable in nature and can change from calm and docile to lethal and violent. The best way to interact with the wildlife of Yellowstone is not to interact with them at all. If you want to see them, start from the comfort and safety of your car while maintaining a distance of at least 100 meters for bears and wolves and 25 meters for moose and bison. Preferably, your glass should be raised and your engine running, just in case you need to make a quick exit. Wildlife traps are a common occurrence in Yellowstone National Park. These are like bottle pulling but are not caused by the wildlife of Yellowstone, but by hooks and bison. It's all very interesting, but it can get bad quickly if someone makes a wrong move. If you ever find congestion with these animals, stay in your vehicle. Do not honk at animals or lower the windows of your car. These animals are quick to become aggressive. If you follow the rules, it is unlikely that you will be hurt by any of these animals. And the history of Yellowstone National Park, the thermal springs, has hurt much more people than encounters with wildlife. Some of these dangers are undoubtedly new to you if you have never visited the national park before. That is why visitors are advised to follow all the safety instructions offered by the park administration through posters, pamphlets, and oral warnings. But despite how dangerous the terrain is, you will find it fascinating to know that, hundreds of years ago, it was home to a whole civilization of people. For more than 11,000 years, people lived in Yellowstone. There are archaeological sites, trails, bridges, and other structures of civilization still intact and preserved in the park. So, when the Europeans began to explore the terrain, it was the 1800s. In the 1870s, it was officially established as the first national park in the world. The stories of the people who lived before are preserved in the structures they built. Of course, some changes in the landscape, such as the construction of roads and new trails, had to be implemented over the years to make it accessible to visitors. However, the Yellowstone National Park was not created only with the interest of visitors and tourists in mind. The structures of previous civilizations are being actively preserved. Historical constructions, cultural landscapes, and places associated with significant events, people, or groups of people are registered as national monuments and are protected by the government. The wildlife of the Yellowstone National Park is also being actively managed. Until the mid-1960s, there were population limits established for the wildlife of the park, such as the hawk or the bison. When these reached their predetermined population limits, the park managers would reduce their populations by killing them. In simple terms, when they began to become too many, some of them were dead. Still, in an attempt to preserve the cultural and ethnic history of Yellowstone, the heads of Native Americans were involved. Currently, there are 27 tribes associated with the park. These tribes have ancestral links with Yellowstone National Park. These connections are usually cultural or spiritual, and many of the park's resources are still culturally or spiritually relevant to the tribes. These associated tribes bring their cultural perspectives to the decisions made by the park's administration. They also regulate the park's projects which can affect their ethnographic and historical resources. But as much as they try to preserve the original state of Yellowstone before becoming a national park, there is only a lot that can be done. At the moment the magma monster resurfaces under the ground of the National Park of Yellowstone, decides to break and appear, absolutely nothing in its way will be spared. Both modern and historical structures, bison, Alps, and humans, including. And that's exactly why park staff close the park in situations where there is the slightest sign of an imminent eruption of this supervolcano of Yellowstone. So what can be done in the event of an eruption in Yellowstone? The last eruption of Yellowstone, which occurred more than 600,000 years ago, released so much ash and various types of gases in the atmosphere that probably significantly affected the climate of the world and also certainly caused the extinction of entire species, especially those found exclusively in America. Due to the direct and indirect effects of an eruption and the magnitude of the Yellowstone supervolcano, it is likely that global civilizations will be completely decimated. The whole world will be affected, and surviving civilizations will have to recover from the long-term effects of all the ashes and toxic gases that will be released into the atmosphere by volcanic eruptions. Unfortunately, in addition to cleaning the entire continent, you can't do much to avoid the drastic effects of a Yellowstone eruption. But some good news. Yellowstone National Park does not run the risk of being closed for fear of an imminent volcanic eruption. Specialists have sufficient geological evidence to maintain their position. It is unlikely that the Yellowstone volcano will break in our life or even in the next one. It may take thousands of years for the next significant volcanic eruption to occur in Yellowstone. And even if it does happen in our life, there will be a significant amount of death and destruction, especially of plants, wildlife, historical and modern structures, and even some humans. But it will not be enough to destroy an entire continent or even half of a continent. The global civilization we currently live in will be definitely affected, but it will survive and recover from the destructive effects of the supervolcano eruption. An association known as the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory has a team of full-time employees who are paid to keep an eye on the volcano. In fact, some scientists are convinced that there will probably never be another eruption of this supervolcano, at least not from Yellowstone or any other supervolcano in the world. Scientists have been able to discover that the magma chamber below Yellowstone National Park is only 5 to 15% melted. You probably already have a good idea of what that means. Still, to put this into perspective, these scientists believe that you have a greater chance of being killed by a lightning bolt or even by a piano than a magma melted from the Yellowstone volcano. Therefore, although it is unlikely that you will die from melted lava from the Yellowstone supervolcano, at any moment this volcano has other dangers. These dangers may not be as fatal as an eruption of a supervolcano, but they are fatal anyway. One of these dangers is hydrothermal explosions. Without almost any warning, Yellowstone's thermal characteristics can spontaneously erupt like geysers that shoot rocks in all directions. These hydrothermal explosions form craters, some are smaller than others. The small one occurs more often, typically impacting an area of only about 3 meters in diameter. Larger hydrothermal explosions occur less often. These explosions can shoot rocks and launch hot water at a distance of up to a few thousand meters. These hydrothermal explosions are random. On average, only one occurs every 2 years. It is expected that, when they occur, few or no visitors will be nearby. Another danger is large earthquakes. There are thousands of earthquakes every year in Yellowstone. While some are so small, they can go unnoticed, except for the use of special equipment. Some are big earthquakes. These earthquakes are very rare, and can occur only twice a century, but they are not easy to predict and can cause a lot of damage. Let's know what you think in the comments section below.